Welcome to the Boxing Science Podcast. This is episode 29, a Q&A session where we're going to be answering your questions around sports science in boxing. We've got a range of different subjects, from ice baths for boxing and different recovery methods that we can use. We're going to be talking about the use of sauna suits or sweat suits for boxing. We're going to also be discussing programming strategies around athletes that can only train one time per day. And then we're going to be discussing about rest times between rounds in sparring. So we've got a range of different subjects to get through. If you're a new viewer to the channel or listener to the podcast, please hit the subscribe button. We're going to start off with the question that we receive quite often. And whenever I post this on Instagram, it gets a huge response. Are ice baths good for boxing? You're seeing load more athletes, load more boxers. I think it looks cool on Instagram when
It's cool, mate.
Somebody's jumping into an ice bath. What are your thoughts on it in terms of recovery?
As always, it's this case of why would you want to jump in a bath of ice cold water? What's the purpose of it? Do you know as an athlete or do you know as a coach why you're using that? And what mechanisms is it improving? What is it alleviating? So I think the use of ice baths has stemmed from the RICE principle. So, rest, ice, compression, elevation. And ice being used as a tool to reduce swelling acutely. So the theory is, if you jump into an ice bath and you make yourself cold, you make your muscles cold. That's different to making your core temperature cold. If you make your muscles cold or your extremities cold, that could potentially decrease the swelling around your muscles. With a reduced swelling, you get reduced pain or sensations of pain, and you might feel a little bit better after it. Whether or not that has a performance benefit or a recovery benefit is another question. So the idea is to reduce that swelling, reduce that perception of pain after you're out of the bath, because when you're in the bath, that is painful. Yeah. Painful in itself. And quite often what we don't do as physiologists and thermal physiologists is really think about the psychological demands of preparing to get in an ice bath, being in the ice bath, and that challenge that represents, and whether or not that's a useful and stressful stimulus. So that's another thing to consider. The other thing to consider is, what temperature should the bath be at? Because you can just get your water bucket. You can use a wheelie bin if you really want to. Yeah. Chuck some ice in. What temperature is that at?
I saw a boxer. I don't know whether the play acting a little bit, but it was literally freezing to the point where it was really rigid. Yeah. And they had to kind of drag him out of the bath. Yeah. And that's not the temperature to go out for cold water immersion.
No, absolutely not. And so the idea is not to reduce core body temperature to the point of hypothermia. It's just to make the extremities cold and induce that constrictive effect that will then reduce that swelling.
So it'd be an idea to not probably go in with chest, because whenever we're saying about raising temperature, we're on about in a hot bath. Yeah. We're on about keeping the chest in. Yeah. To do ice baths, you don't want to reduce that core temperature. So would you just go purely lower body?
And I think if you see a lot of people, especially if they're in the wheelie bins, they'll just lift themselves out. I think you see a lot of runners do that. They'll be just immersed in their lower extremities. So that's one thing. Another thing is the water temperature. Another thing is how long. Yeah. How long do you need? Yeah. How long can you sustain that? How long do you want to be under stress? I don't think there's any real hard and fast guidelines on this. Clearly, you do want a water temperature that's probably less than 10 degrees, but above freezing. Off the top of my mind, I think around about 10 degrees is probably okay. And then for how long? Yeah. And that becomes, one of those questions around tolerability. And then how do we know it's having an effect? So how do we know it's affecting what we're trying to do, which is having a constrictive effect and reducing swelling and edema and those kind of sensations? Yeah. The only really thing we know is whether or not there is a performance benefit afterwards. So do we see an improved restoration in, for example, a count movement jump?
Yeah. There's actually some data that's just come out where it's actually reduced performance targets. Most of the data is like going towards perception and perceptual markers of fatigue, which is important because an athlete will have to keep training whether they've physically fatigued or not. Yeah. The question is there something out there better physiologically than ice baths? Because if it does something perceptual, that's fantastic. Yeah. But if there's something there that gives you perceptual benefits, but also gains in physiological performance and gains in recovery, which brings us on to probably the next topic, which is perfect. Little segue into it is the use of contrast baths, contrast showers, working between hot and cold. Yeah. And there is some physiological adaptations from that. What kind of responses do you get from going between hot and cold?
Yeah, just going back on one point, there's one thing thinking about recovery, and there's another thing that's thinking about optimizing adaptation. Yeah, and whether or not ice baths. And I think the evidence for the benefits and negatives is still equivocal. I think there's no clear consensus one way or the other. Some camps leaning one way, some camps leaning the other way. So on the balance of evidence, we can't make a strong recommendation for one or the other. But I do think there's probably more evidence suggesting that cold water immersion blunts adaptations. Okay. Especially strength adaptations. But we just got to keep us eye on the scientific literature for that. And the other thing is, like you mentioned, that perceptual benefit. So like with most recovery methods, usually no harm in applying them, in that there's usually no meaningful decrease in performance or, causing any undue harm to anyone from undertaking a recovery method. So if you think about all the recovery methods that you could use, low intensity running, foam rolling, massage, maybe a little blood flow restriction, all these different types of recovery that you can use. There's no real harm in using them. So the question then becomes, well, does any of them give you a performance benefit or truly help you improve adaptation to what you're trying to do? And then what's the perceptual benefit and how do you feel after you've used that? Because if you feel great after you've undertaken a recovery protocol, then that's going to probably have a beneficial effect in what you're trying to do in the next session. So one of the ways that we found, and some of the literature backs this up, and actually some of the bathing protocols that are hundreds, if not centuries of years old, is contrast bathing, where you switch in temperature. You might do a period of either hot water immersion or a period of sauna, and then switch and get a cold shower. Or it might be a jacuzzi and then a cold shower. Or it might be shower, plunge pool, and then a hot room, if you're like in a spa, and just switching between those multiple times. And that makes athletes feel absolutely amazing. Yeah.
How long would you say to expose yourself to heat and then to the cold? When I remember it was, because you got me doing it with Kel Brooke when we was out in Fuerteventura, went to a spa, and people must have been thinking that we're mad because we're just like literally doing a circuit, and they were like something like 3 minutes in sauna, then back to moderate, back to steam room, into the cold plunge. But the cold plunge was only like literally 30 seconds, which I was quite glad about.
It's cool.
But so it's majority like towards heat exposure, and then a short, sharp
dip.
Yeah. What kind of response does that give you? Why is it so predominant heat compared to cold exposure?
That cold exposure is not there to do anything physiologically. It's just there as a perception. Okay. The heat is there for that relaxation purpose, so your muscles just feel relaxed. I'm sure there's some hormonal changes as well. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what they might be. I do know that's perhaps some changes in an increase in parasympathetic nervous system activity and a decrease in sympathetic. So you are getting that general relaxation and a decrease in stressfulness from doing that, which then in turn leads into that improvement in perception and feeling good from it. So when you go in the heat, you've got muscle relaxation. It makes you feel good anyway. I'm sure you've got some particularly strong hormonal releases from that. But yeah, the plunge or the cold is just there to give you that contrast that when you go back in the heat, then it just makes you feel great.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot. I think even though those contrast protocols have been practiced for centuries, the scientific literature and understanding is probably not caught up with that as much yet. I only know a spattering of protocols that are out there.
When I've done it, I did it recently with Lorone, where literally we're in the sauna for 5 minutes, get out, do the cold shower, back into the sauna. What I found was that the tolerance to the heat was a lot better. Like whenever I get in the sauna, it's like after 5 minutes, I'm like thinking, oh God, I want to get out or whatever. I think like the cold, I think it maintains your core temperature rather than you going in sauna for like let's say 10, 15 minutes. You get into end and you're thinking, and that heat stress can end up being quite draining,
oppressive.
Rather than like with that cold exposure, it actually maintains that core temperature so that heat stress isn't as I think probably what it does, if we looked at where we were losing heat from, heat balance and things like that, you get a rapid change in skin temperature. So when you're in the sauna, you'll have blood flow to your you'll have vasodilation, and then you'll have blood flow to your periphery, so your skin temperature goes up. When you get in the plunge pool, suddenly you've got a massive temperature contrast against the skin. You're going to have a lot of heat dissipation because of that, and that's going to keep that skin temperature down, so that when you get back into the sauna or the next hot environment, you've got that little buffer to increase skin temperature again before you start feeling a little bit too hot. And you just repeat that cycle. So any athletes or coaches listening to this, and let's say they haven't got access to sauna or plunge pool or anything, what's a very simple and basic kind of shower protocol that they could do, and when should they do it?
Well, the protocol is, it would be roughly 2 minutes heat or 1 minute heat. Don't need to start super hot in the temperature, just crank it up and then turn it down so it's a little bit cooler for another minute. And you should be able to do it a minute. We're not talking about Wim Hof type exposures here. And then back up a little bit higher for another minute or two. And then back down, try and get it a little bit cooler for a minute. And you just repeat in those cycles. Always start on hot, always finish on hot. That cycle can last around about 10 minutes.
Links in quite nicely to the next question, is whether boxers should wear sweatsuits or sauna suits during boxing, running, everything like that. It's something that we've kind of covered quite a lot on Instagram quite a few times. It always gets a response where you've got probably the old school kicking off and saying that we've used them for years. We've got the new school that are celebrating it, saying this is what I've been trying to tell boxers. What is the general kind of thoughts on sauna suit and sweatsuit usage in boxing?
Yeah. When you wear a sweatsuit, it's a full barrier to heat dissipation. So if you think of avenues of heat loss, the major avenue of heat loss is sweat. When you're wearing a sweatsuit, there is no avenue for sweat loss, especially if you've got the hood up, apart from your face. That's it. So that heat loss mechanism is redundant. So you can't lose heat as effectively as you could do. You also can't lose heat convectively because you've got no airflow against the skin. So that's another way of heat loss gone, and we don't really lose heat through conduction at all. Radiation is going to be minimal as well. We're stopping heat being dissipated to the environment depending on the intensity of exercise, which when you're wearing a sauna suit, traditionally it's plodding, really. Reduction in heat loss combined with metabolic heat production because we produce heat. We're very inefficient. We produce heat when we produce energy to do mechanical work. Is going to raise body temperature. That increase in body temperature will then stimulate a sweat response. When we reach a certain temperature threshold, we have an onset of sweating, and we have an increase in the rate of sweat. So when you're performing exercise in a sauna suit, you'll get hot relatively quickly and then start sweating a lot. So that is the main physiological and thermophysiological responses to wearing a sweatsuit. Now the question becomes, why would you want to do that? So really the only thing you are doing when you're running in a sweatsuit is increasing core temperature and increasing sweat production. You have cardiovascular responses to that as well. So due to that increase in core temperature, you'll have vasodilation principally to the skin surface to help dissipate heat, which is not happening. So you'll probably get an increase in cardiac output, either through an increase in stroke volume, so the amount of blood that's pumped out in one beat.
It elevates your heart rate.
Or an elevation in heart rate.
Yeah.
And it's normally an elevation of heart rate at lower intensities that will increase cardiac output.
Yeah.
So you get those three things really: increase in core temperature, increase in sweat production, increase in cardiac demand. Now, those are acute variables. Why would we want to increase core temperature? Why would we want to increase sweat rate? Why would we want to increase cardiac output? What we're not getting realistically is any change in fat burning, which is why people use sweatsuits.
I think that they're using it for.
And in fact, when you get hotter, you will decrease the amount of fat that you utilize, and you'll predominantly use carbohydrates. And that is probably due to an increase in hormones like adrenaline or cortisol, whereby we will then preferentially use carbohydrate as a fuel. And the other thing is, if anyone has actually looked at the amount of fat that anyone burned during exercise, it's absolutely minimal. So when people talk about, oh, I'm going on a fat burning session, it's literally grams that you're using. And that's determined by intensity. So when you're wearing a sweatsuit, because cardiovascular demand is relatively higher, because you've got a higher core temperature, because your sweat rate's higher, the intensity of exercise is less. So because it's less, that potential for you to burn energy is also less.
And also because of the dehydration from increased sweat rate, that'll reduce the intensity for longer. So at the back end of the session, intensity will have to be reduced.
That's it. So if you're not replacing those fluids that you're losing, intensity will be reduced further because of that potential dehydration. Now, what people do confuse an increase in energy expenditure with is an increase in heart rate. So just because there's an increase in heart rate doesn't mean that you're burning more energy. The increase in heart rate is evident when you're wearing a sauna suit because the heart has to work harder to pump blood to the periphery, not because you're demanding more energy. The mechanical demands are those energetic demands that are required from running at that intensity. Nothing else apart from maybe the heart beating a little bit faster than the energy that's required for that, or maybe a little bit more energy from the brain to be able to process some of these extra physiological demands.
It's interesting because that's something that your heart rate monitor doesn't tell you. It literally tells you your heart rate's this, your calorie expenditure is this. So they'll look at the session and they'll think, oh, we've burnt way more calories. But actually it's the mechanical demands that is what's going to burn the more calories. Absolutely. Basically.
So all your heart rate monitor is doing is it's applying an equation that relates to a percentage of maximum heart rate, and this is just a generic equation, to oxygen uptake or energy expenditure, depending on how the manufacturer has calculated this. And what they've done is they've just gone, well, at 80% heart rate max, then the energy expenditure is equivalent to this. So when you're at 80% heart rate max, you're doing this amount of calories. And it assumes that you're going to be doing it in a normal temperate environment when there's no environmental influences. It's doing its job. It's just that where people interpret that data in a way that is in a setting that is artificial to what it's intended for, because we're adding that environmental stress. Unless you know what your energy expenditure is through indirect calorimetry, if you've done some gas analysis.
Yeah, which most people won't have.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then you won't know.
No, really interesting. Is there positives for wearing sauna suits?
Absolutely.
Is there a way that you'd say, right, this is where you'd wear a sauna suit?
Yeah, absolutely. There's always benefits from heat, and whenever you can apply heat in your training in a sensible and the right place, it's always going to be beneficial, in my opinion.
Yeah.
The things that you need to think about is, if you're getting hot and you're getting sweaty, then you're probably going to be stimulating an expansion in plasma volume, so the watery part of the blood.
Yeah.
That increase in plasma volume is going to have beneficial adaptations on cardiovascular stability in normal environments, because there is more blood volume, or there's more plasma volume, so there's a greater total amount of fluid within the body that can help regulate blood pressure or defend against fluid losses or dissipate heat to the environment, and just allow the inner workings of the body just function better. That's why we say, be hydrated and drink and drink well. That's one of the reasons why we say that. So in the short term, that's going to have a benefit. So plasma volume expansion usually takes around about 5 to 6 days, and then it starts to level off, if not come back to normal. If you can get hot and sweaty for a prolonged period of time, then you're going to get some thermoregulatory adaptations, such as an increased rate of sweat, an earlier onset of sweat, and that will help you in your training sessions because you'll be able to control body temperature better, so you won't feel as hot, so you can push on as hard. There won't be as much demand on your cardiovascular system to regulate things like blood flow to the periphery or blood pressure, things like that. So it becomes easy for your body to adapt to hotter environments or intensity of exercise whereby you've got to work at a higher body temperature. In terms of refining how you apply that in training, you need to make a trade-off between when you're applying heat, how long you're applying heat, and how you're doing it. So if you are wearing a sauna suit and you're going out on long runs, what's that taking away from your training program? Are you having to sacrifice some intensity? Are you having to drop a strength training session because of that? Are you adding extra mechanical load into your training that you could probably do without? Have you got any injury risks that might flare up because of that long, slow plodding that you might do? Because it's certainly hard to combine a sauna suit with sprinting. So
you'd probably go for more low intensity work. Why would you want to apply heat on low intensity work?
Because you're going to get too hot too quickly. It's also it's harder to do, isn't it? You're gonna if you try and apply heat to a quality session, you're always going to reduce the intensity of that quality session. Plus, if you're wearing a sauna suit, how are you supposed to create the mechanical forces that you need to run at high intensity?
So you can get some more kind of passive adaptations from doing the same session, kind of low intensity with a sauna suit.
Yeah, well, if you're active, it's not like a passive intensity.
Where it's like adding a percentage to your low intensity sessions.
Yeah. So that is a potential way to do it to enhance your recovery session as well.
Yeah.
And again, it comes down to that people's perceptions of, do you think this is beneficial? And I think for most people, they would feel some kind of benefit from using a sauna suit. If you're hot but not too hot, then that can make you feel better. If you feel like you've sweat a lot, that can also make you feel better. And plus, you get that kind of vicarious benefit from knowing that, well, other people use sauna suits. That boxer uses it, that boxer uses it. So I'm using a sauna suit as well. So I'm going to get the benefits that they're getting as well.
Yeah. In a nutshell, probably don't use sauna suits for all these sessions, especially when you're looking to try and maximize intensity. So that's your normal boxing sessions, your conditioning sessions, your strength sessions. You don't want to be using sauna suit. Yeah. Whereas it can be used as a tool to help boost recovery and get some extra percentages out of your low intensity sessions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So next question, how would you program for people training one time per day? we're quite lucky at Boxing Science because we've got a range of different athletes that are full-time professionals. So we can train them twice a day, but there's obviously lower level professionals or amateurs that don't have the luxury of being a full-time athlete. They either have to get up really early in the morning and train before work, and then obviously have to drag themselves to training after work. So sometimes people can't do that and haven't got the commitment levels to be able to train twice a day. So training once a day is something that I get asked quite a lot, especially around amateur boxing, young athletes, because they're not likely to train before school. They're going in and all their strength and conditioning has to be kind of integrated into the boxing training. The advice would be is to try and integrate that as much as possible into the training, so you can do stuff like movement and mobility as part of the boxing warm-up. All boxers have to warm up when they're going into the training, rather than just going running around and doing a few arm circles and a few karaoke's here and there. That's what a general boxing warm-up is, and then they go into shadow boxing, doing your mobility warm-up there, and then that's part of your strength and conditioning right there. Doing some plyometrics, incorporating that into your warm-up, and then you've got your plyometrics ticked off. And then instead of like your circuit at the end of the boxing training, you can do a strength circuit some days, you can do a core circuit another, then you can do conditioning circuit and everything. That is probably what my main advice would be around that. There's a good video on Boxing Science YouTube channel, Strength and Conditioning for Amateur Boxing, which were really popular, got a really good response, and talking a little bit more in depth how you'd integrate that. Let's talk about like running and high intensity running. Often get the question of how many times should you run per week, high intensity wise? What is the minimum amount of dosage that you'd give an athlete in terms of times per week and also reps for somebody that is struggling to cram it all in, basically?
Yeah. Well, first thing I'd say, just to back up what your point around boxing training, a really intelligent thing to do is to look at your day. How is your day structured? And find the opportunities in the day to try and get in some of the lower level S&C stuff, maybe.
Yeah.
And then when you've got a window to try and train, do exactly what you just said there.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is a case of, right, let me have a look at my day, let me have a look at my week, and go, here are the opportunities to get those in, and be really, because you've got to be really optimal about what you're doing. In terms of conditioning, we need to think about first of all, well, what are we going to be doing in conditioning? And if you've got an amateur or somebody who has a limited time to spend training, we need to think about what is the best way to spend time.
Yeah.
What is going to be the session or the variation of sessions that are going to give someone who's time restricted the most benefits? Because and quite often we'll have to look short term either. So rather than thinking in 4-year cycles and thinking long term, it might be that we just think, okay, what does this 6 or 8 or 10 week block look like, and how can we get the best out of an athlete? We've got a range of different sessions. Let's take an amateur boxer, for example. Yeah. We've got a range of different sessions in our HIT handbook that are perfect for amateur boxers. We've got some sessions that are designed around amateur boxing and performance as well. So there's fight HIT specific sessions, and they're absolutely ideal.
Yeah. Only about 15-20 minutes long.
Perfect. Yeah. They're absolutely perfect. So in terms of like thinking about where you're going to put in some conditioning and how long you need to put aside for that, using those to go, right, I know they're like 15-20 minutes plus a warm up.
Yeah.
Or, and then a little bit of time just recovering afterwards. We're not saying they're easy sessions. Yeah. So you're talking like 30 minutes for that session.
Yeah.
And that should be like kind of like the goal. And you can get some really great stuff done in that 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So how many times should you be doing that per week? One session would be able to help you maintain fitness. So if you've already got a good level of fitness and you're looking to maintain that, scheduling one of those fight-specific HIT sessions a week will enable you to maintain that.
Yeah.
2 sessions a week will enable some small incremental improvements.
Yeah.
Absolutely fine. 3 sessions a week will then push you into those accelerated fitness adaptations. Now, I think once you get to 3 times a week, you might then be having to make some allowances in the training program, and choosing what you can put in and what you can take out. 2 sessions a week is usually manageable for most people. It will fit in, fitting around boxing. It'll fit around a bit of strength training. So if you think you've got 2 boxing sessions a week, 2 conditioning sessions a week, 4 sessions in there, it's probably realistic for most people to train. Add another 2 strength training sessions on there if you can, 6 days a week. It's quite doable.
That's probably for people that are looking to just like kind of keep fit, but obviously boxers, they probably need to be in the gym at least 4-5 times a week. So then it's like, then you're looking at actually integrating your strength and your conditioning into the boxing. And that might be doing the boxing and then going maybe doing the run, maybe doing the strength. After that. And
like you mentioned as well, there we've got red zone circuits. So like say one of those, if you've got boxing training 3 times a week, there, and you're wanting to add a circuit off the back of that, adding 1 red zone circuit,
you get some strength and fitness demands from that.
And having 2 fight specific hit sessions that are standalone, then that's going to put you in that 3 sessions a week, and it's going to accelerate fitness.
Definitely. So final question of the podcast. I've been looking forward to this one. 30 seconds versus 60 seconds rest between rounds during sparring. I know gyms that stick to 1 minute. I know gyms that stick to 30 seconds. Now, what are your thoughts around that in terms of rest? Is there any kind of improved physical performance from a shorter rest time? Or does it actually limit performance?
Well, my weird mind goes, why not longer? So if you're manipulating the recovery duration from 30 to 60 seconds, you're doubling it. So why not go from 60 seconds to 2 minutes as well?
Through expanding the work.
The question that would automatically pop up is, if I said, why not go longer than that? Someone might go, well, why? And that's the perfect question to start with. Why would you want to have 30 seconds rest? Why would you want to have 60 seconds rest? Why would you want to have a 2-minute rest in there? And in fact, sometimes there probably will be maybe 2 minutes rest, if someone's got to change something up, or they've got to adjust something, or they've got to change their head guard, change sparring partners and what have you. And then the other thing you're thinking about is, rather than thinking about recovery duration, start with, well, what's the purpose of that round? Because if you're thinking about technical sparring, there's going to be a focus of a particular round, and a coach is going to want their boxer to work on a specific aspect of their performance. Or they're going to ask the sparring partner to perform in a particular way, starting with, well, what's the purpose of that round or of that whole sparring session? So that's thinking about the technical and tactical demands. Then think about, well, what physical demands is that imposing? And then think about what physiological and psychological demand that physical demand is requiring. So what responses are required to be able to cope with that demand? And then you can start to think about recovery. And whether or not that 30, so if you take a 30-second recovery, that is going to undoubtedly, in most situations anyway, add to the physiological demand. That's going to add to the physical demand. And then what's that going to do to the tactical and technical requirements? Is it going to impose demands that are required? So are you practicing a particular movement set, perhaps practicing a little bit of movement or some defensive qualities, or throwing combinations under fatigue? Really, whichever way you look at it, it comes as, well, what's the point?
Obviously, making it 30 seconds instead of 60 seconds, when they get to a fight, obviously they're going to be a lot fitter. Or feeling fitter, or feeling more recovered in between the rounds. Now, what I'd say is that the 30 seconds will increase the physical demands.
Yeah.
So then that will limit the intensity. With the minute rest, it's less physically demanding. Really, it can be increasing physical demands because you're rested. So then you can increase that intensity and you can get better fitness adaptations from that. Obviously, the quality of the spar will be better because you're going to be less fatigued, especially to the latter stages. But I think that there's a place for them both because, like I said, because it increases physical demands, it's going to be psychologically tougher. So it's increasing that concentration. What you said, it's really good because it's what I had in mind for this question as well. Why not increase the rest time as well? So you increase that rest time, that makes it physically less demanding. So then that increases the intensity of the round, potentially increase the quality of the sparring as well. And that's probably similar to why you'd get fresh sparring in and get 2 or 3 different sparring partners as well. Again, just challenging them in different ways. Now, something that was quite interesting that I talked about with Fabio Wardley the other day, I asked it because he did 2 or 3 camps with Usyk, and I asked him, what was the craziest thing that they did? He was like, obviously they do the blocks, they do the mental training, stuff like that after the sparring, which was interesting. But something that he said that really got me thinking is that they change the sparring every single day in terms of the volume and the intensity. They didn't tell him until Fabio basically asked. They're just basically throwing him in there. Some days it'd be 2-minute rounds, maybe even 1-minute rounds. And then some days it'd be 5-minute rounds. So the volume and intensity changes a lot. Now, if we think about our conditioning training, think about our strength training, we manipulate the volume and intensity all the time. In boxing, how often is that done? Mm-hmm. And we're working on 3-minute rounds all the time. In sparring, if you're just working on 3-minute rounds all the time, where's that kind of manipulation of volume and intensity? Obviously, you can manipulate the rest times. Why not manipulate the sparring times as well? Sparring for 1-minute rounds to really, really work at them, really high intensities. Now, I wouldn't say, obviously it's got to be under supervision for 5-minute rounds because when you fatigue, that's more likely when you start taking shots and increase the risks of concussion and stuff like that. So you've got to be careful with that. But that lower volume, that longer volume of work, that lower intensity work can provide a good foundation for your camp, and then keep mixing the high intensity work as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You're smiling because you're thinking that's a great idea.
No, yeah, this was what I was going to say, because you can manipulate the same variables as would do with conditioning.
Yeah.
So you can manipulate the intensity, you can manipulate the duration, you can manipulate the duration of recovery, you can change the number of rounds, you can change the sparring partner, you can have a break, so change the series if you want. So you could do 3 rounds, then have a 5 or 10 minute break, then do another 3 rounds. So that's adding series into that. Could change the type of shot that you throw. So if you're doing a 5-minute round, then to improve the safety of that, it could be you can only throw a jab.
Yeah.
You can only jab.
We're not encouraging people to go and do doghouse and Mayweather style. No. But making it a more technical thing, and that'll obviously doing that over 5 minutes will increase concentration and stuff like that. So it's interesting. Probably got a few people kind of scratching their heads and thinking about how they can manipulate the sparring. But you think about that intensity, and I was talking with Tommy just before filming this podcast, kind of intensity curve that he created through kind of punch outputs. Yeah. Like what is the most intense 10 seconds of a fight is that actually replicated in sparring, and the only way that you probably can go for it and replicate that most intense 10, 30 seconds, 60 seconds is shortening the duration of the spar. And that's really exposing athletes to probably what the demands are in boxing, because you don't spar the way that you fight. When you go for a fight and you've got somebody hurt, you're going to step it up. Yeah. So likewise, the opponent's going to step it up if they hurt you as well. So you've got to try and expose the athletes to that kind of level of intensity in a safe way. So yeah, I think that's a great kind of topic conversation, something that probably you'd have to speak to boxing coaches about, and a lot of boxing coaches will be listening to this, and they can decide what to do with them thoughts. That's something for them to implement and work it in a way that works for them. I think it's definitely interesting when you're looking at the physiological adaptations that you can get from manipulating the rounds in sparring. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this podcast episode. Thank you very much, Alan, for your wisdom and your knowledge. If you enjoyed the podcast and you're not a subscriber yet, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future content. And I'll hopefully see you on the next episode of the Boxing Science Podcast.